but also what is happening at global level, trying to make sure that Europe leads, but that also no one is left behind. And we also look at how our policies are impacting outside European borders and try to address those issues. So today, I'm very, last but not least, I wanted to mention that we are part of the Green 10 NGO network. The Green 10 brings together the most important environmental NGOs in Brussels. So you see that we have Bankwatch, Bankwatch, BirdLife, Can Europe, Friends of the Earth Europe, Greenpeace, HEAL. We also have Transport and Environment, WWF, and Nature Europe network. So we are a founding member of this Green 10 network, and we are very honored, but also very happy to be able to help the network to progress policy making in environmental topics. Sorry, it doesn't seem to work. Okay, I'm here today to talk to you about the new European policy framework and financial instruments for climate. And this is a very important moment in time. Why? Because first of all, we are all in a climate emergency. I think this is not new to anyone, because we have been experienced even last summer extreme weather episodes all across Europe, and also we know that things are happening the same, more or less, if not even harder, outside Europe in other continents. And science has reminded us very, very recently, last August, when the International Panel on Climate Change presented the 6th assessment report on climate, has reminded us that we are in a climate emergency. We need absolutely to increase our greenhouse gas emissions massively. Why? Because we are nowhere near the Paris Agreement temperature goal, which is that of keeping the global temperature rise below 1.5 Celsius degrees by 2050, which is the safety threshold that science has set for conditions on the planet to be compatible with human life. So that's why the 1.5 is our lighthouse, is our goal, but we are nowhere near there. And if you also look at the United Nations Environmental Program emissions gap report for 2020, you will find there, I have put the link so you can click on the links, and you will find that this report highlights how far we are from that emissions context, which could take us to the 1.5 degree target. Another important takeaway from the IPCC report last August is that human activities do play a role in global warming, and the world is heating at a faster pace than expected, and even than what science expected, and every ton of CO2 emissions adds to global warming. We are heading actually for a 3-degree temperature increase, not so, as I said before, nowhere near 1.5. And human-induced climate change is already affecting many weather and climate extremes in every region across the globe, as I said, and it is by now unequivocal the human influence has warmed the climate at a rate that is unprecedented in at least the last 20,000 years. So there is a lot of climate skepticism a bit everywhere, even in Europe, but science reminds us that these are facts, that human activities are influencing global warming, and we cannot deny it any longer. So what is Europe doing to address the climate emergency? as you probably know, last year member states have agreed that the European Union will become climate neutral by 2050. So climate neutral is an interesting concept, because it means that basically whatever emissions we generate, we have also to kind of absorb them, and in order that our climate budget is neutral. So we're not, we are basically capturing and absorbing emissions through in the largest way through carbon sinks, so natural sinks, in a way that our balance is neutral. So we do not emit and leave emissions to stay up in the atmosphere. Member states have agreed also that in order to get to climate neutrality by 2050, we need to reduce emissions by 55% by 2030 with regard to levels in 1990. However, we as EEB, but also all the other NGOs are saying that 55% net is not the target we need, because Europe needs to contribute to the global fight against climate change by at least 65%. So in terms of ambition, what the European Union has agreed is not enough. However, let's see how the European Commission proposes that we would get to a minus 55 net by 2030. The Commission proposed a legislative package revising all climate and energy legislation, which is called Fit for 55. This package is a huge regulatory and policy framework revising at least 15 pieces of legislation, and member states in the Council under the Slovenian presidency, as you know, and the European Parliament will have to negotiate the package over the next year, possibly even next 2 years. And negotiations have already started. There has been an environmental council in October. The Parliament has already appointed the rapporteurs in the Parliament and has already started discussing these proposals. So where is Europe in terms of emissions? As you see from this very recent statistics, which dates to 2020, the most important driver of emissions in Europe is the energy supply sector. So this basically this line here in blue. You see that in terms of emission of million tons CO2, it's the largest contributing sector. It has, if you see this blue line, it has reduced emissions a bit, but not so much. And that's where we are today. The second largest contributor is the light gray line is industry, okay? So industry, why? Because industry is using a lot of energy for its processes, but also emits in terms of industrial processes. So it's an emitter because it uses a lot of energy, and this energy comes from fossil fuels. And it also emits during the manufacturing process. So industry is the second largest contributor. The third largest contributor, which is even, as you see, the black line, even increasing emissions, is the transport sector, which is still heavily dependent on fossil fuels, be it oil, mostly oil, but also gas, and which is increasing its emission, as you see here in the black line. Then we have other important sectors contributing, such as building sector, residential and commercial, the green light, the agriculture sector, which, as you see here, has not basically reduced its emission over the past, let's say, I would say 30 years, which is quite worrying. And then international aviation and waste and international shipping are also contributing, but what is most important is that they are not reducing their emissions. So on the back of this context of this emissions scenario, the Fit for 55 will try to address the different sectors by establishing 2030 climate targets for the different sectors. You will see we have the EU emissions trading scheme for power and industry, which will also include maritime and aviation. Aviation is already included in this system, but only when it comes to European flights, not flights that goes from Europe that go from Europe outside Europe, and this is also not a good news, because we would like that the aviation sector covers also international flights, so not only flights in Europe. Then we have an emissions trading. We will have an emissions trading for road transport and buildings. This is a new proposal, but it's very important that transport and buildings are tackled in terms of emissions, because as you have seen previously, these sectors are not really reducing their emissions. Then we will have strategies for increasing energy efficiency, increasing renewable energy, and also the regulation for CO2 emission standards for cars and vans that will be reinforced, the effort sharing regulation that sets binding targets for certain sectors for the member states, and then other instruments such as a carbon border adjustment mechanism that will have to introduce a tax for imports of highly CO2 intensive products into Europe if the negotiators agree upon the introduction of this instrument. And then there is the Energy Taxation Directive, which establishes minimum tax rates for energies across Europe, and which has not been revised for at least the last 15 years. So it's an important instrument, and it's still not up to what we need in terms of internalizing the polluter pays principle in energy taxation. So make the energy suppliers pay for the pollution they cause through their production activities based on fossil fuels. And this energy taxation regards specifically fuels for buildings and transport, which are, as I said, are lagging behind in terms of emissions reductions, and therefore it is an important instrument. So let's have a look at what targets the Fit for 55 has established. First of all, as I said, emission reductions for power and sector, 61% reductions compared to levels in 2005. And these emissions reductions will have to be reached by a revision of the emissions trading scheme, which, as you know, is a cap and trade scheme that puts a price on CO2 and put also a cap on emissions for these sectors by 2030. However, this target is not enough. We need industry and power and industry sectors to contribute at least by 70%. Then there is a new target for buildings and transport to reduce emissions by 40% compared to 2005 levels. And we will see how this will work. For the time being, we don't know whether this target is enough and how it will be achieved, because there are proposals to introduce an emissions trading scheme for buildings and transport, and these proposals are already quite controversial across the member states. And then we will have new binding targets for member states to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in transport, buildings, agriculture, waste, industry that is not covered by the ETS. And these national targets are based on gross domestic product, meaning that they are differentiated across the 27 member states. Then there are targets for the energy sector, which, as I said, accounts for at least half the EU's greenhouse gas emissions. There is a new target for renewable energy, which is a European-wide binding target to reach generate at least 40% of energy by 2030 through renewable sources. However, we as EEB think that this 40% is not enough. Europe can do more. Renewable energy is already commercially there and less expensive than fossil fuels. We can do more. We can increase this target to 50%, and we have to make this target not only binding at European level but also at national level. So each member state has to contribute by that percentage to increase renewable energies uptake in Europe. There is also a small binding target for renewables to be used in heating and cooling. Heating and cooling is a sector that is still depending a lot on fossil fuels, be it coal, be it oil, be it gas. We need to reduce the dependency of these sectors on fossil fuels, and we need to really push towards a wider use of renewable energy. Then we have the target on energy efficiency, which will be a target to increase energy efficiency by 39% in primary energy consumption and 36% in final energy consumption. However, these targets are not enough. We assess that in order to have a 100% renewable energy system by 2040, which is what is needed to get to that 1.5 temperature goal under the Paris Agreement, we need to massively reduce our energy consumption, and energy efficiency measures are key to reduce energy consumption in the building sectors, but also in industry and in transport. Therefore, we can do more, and we should get to a target of at least 45. And as for renewable energy, this target has to be binding also for the member states, not only for Europe as a union. So going to the specific topic of how we get there and what financial instruments are proposed in the Fit for 55 to allow us to achieve those targets, but in a way that is fair, socially fair, and addresses the economic and social burdens of achieving those targets. The so-called principle of leaving no one behind, which is at the basis of the European Green Deal and therefore of the Fit for 55 package. So there are several instruments at European level and that can be used in order to raise money to tackle the economic and social impact. The emissions trading scheme, as you know, because it is based on the sale of CO2 emissions allowances, generates revenues, despite the fact that revenues clearly depend on the price of CO2, and we need a price of CO2 that is really high in order to generate significant revenues. At the moment, the price of CO2 is 60 euros, more or less, a bit less than 60 euros per ton of CO2. We need to get to a price of at least 100 euros per ton of CO2 in order to accelerate the decarbonization of industry and power sector, and to generate significant resources to be reused. So the two European funds that are fed by the revenues of the ETS are the Innovation Fund and the Modernization Fund. The innovation is there to drive innovation in industrial sectors and energy sectors, and to promote climate neutral technologies. The Modernization Fund is especially for Central and European member states, which are still heavily dependent on fossil fuels, in order to decarbonize their energy sector. Then there is another financial channel, which are the ETS auctioning revenues that member states can generate through the sale of CO2 allowances, which are allocated by member state. And these auctioning revenues so far have not been used entirely for climate purposes. Member states have used them, for instance, to prop up their budgets. We have asked for 100% of these revenues to be used only for climate purposes. And the Fit for 55 is proposing this new element, and we are glad of this and hope that the member states will finally agree upon this. Then there are new sources generated by the emissions trading scheme for road and transport and buildings, which, as I said, is a new proposal under the Fit for 55. And these revenues will be spent for heating and cooling, to support for heating and cooling in order to promote the decarbonization of heating and cooling. They will also be used to support the low-income households in how to be sure that their energy in their households is going towards renewables, and that they can be protected from higher costs. Then it will be also used to promote the uptake of zero emissions transport, and also to support households for this specific target. And part of the revenues will go into the newly introduced Social Climate Fund, which is still, again, a European fund. Other financial instruments introduced in the Fit for 55 package are the carbon border adjustment. As I said, this is a CO2 price that will be imposed on imports of specific highly intensive CO2 imports in the sectors of steel, aluminium, fertilizers, electricity, and cement. These sectors have been identified as those where imports into Europe are most relevant in terms of CO2 emissions, and therefore the carbon border adjustment will impose a CO2 price all imports to Europe under these sectors, if agreed upon by the member states. Well, what do we do with this CO2 price imposed on imports? We generate revenues, and these revenues can be used for addressing the social and economic impacts, and partly, as the Commission proposed, will also be used to repay. Should also be used to repay for the European Recovery Plan. The Social Climate Fund is a new element introduced by the Fit for 55, and so it's a new European fund, if you want, under the European budget, and it should be partly fed through more than 72 billion euro as European contribution, so under the European budget, and 144.4 billion euro through a national contribution, so by the member states, of at least 50%. So it's partly money for this Social Climate Fund will come partly from the European budget and partly from the state budgets. Then there are new rules for state aid for climate, energy, and environment. In Europe, state aid has a specific regulation, and the European Commission is the main watchdog on state aid in Europe, in order to make sure that there are no impacts in the single market. And there are rules which allow state aid for climate, energy, and environmental purposes. We need to make sure that these rules for state aid, and as you know, state aid is given by the state, so comes from public money in national budget. We need to make sure that state aid is not given to any activity which is still based on fossil fuels. State aid rules are quite important. Then last but not least, the next generation EU recovery plan, which has been approved at the beginning of last year, and which is absolutely key in order to generate, to provide resources for transforming our economies towards a climate neutral economy. So let's have a look at the EU budget. What the EU budget does is providing a number of different funds. You will see in this box: Horizon Europe, InvestEU, REACT-EU, the Common Agricultural Policy, the CAP, the Just Transition Mechanism, etc. All these funds are within the European budget and are fed by the European budget. Well, the novelty of the European budget for 2021 and 2027 is that there is the climate mainstream. So the money that under each of these funds has to go to climate purposes has been increased to 30%, which is a very important element, because you see, especially here where I put the arrows, that each of these funds, especially the recovery and resilience, in the recovery and resilience facility, which is the main recovery plan instrument, the climate mainstreaming is even of 37%, meaning that 37% of the money under that fund has to go to climate. And also under the Common Agricultural Policy, under the Just Transition Mechanism, which is a fund that is there to help regions to transition, countries and regions in Europe to transition from a fossil fuel-based economy to a climate neutral economy. And this is particularly relevant for Central and European states. Well, the Just Transition Mechanism earmarks 100% of funds for climate. Why? Because it's a fund that is there to help countries shift towards climate neutrality, a climate neutral economy. The Recovery and Resilience Facility is the key program of the next generation EU recovery plan, and will allocate 360 billion in loans and 312.5 billion in grants to the member states to recover from the COVID, but with a 30% target of money to be allocated for climate purposes. So this is extremely important. This is a huge amount of money. And you probably know that member states have already put forward their national recovery and resilience plan to the Commission for approval, and they have to prove in these plans that 37% of the money they will receive goes to climate purposes. So basically, on the back of this context that I've explained, so the policy and regulatory framework, which is established by the Fit for 55 package, and all the resources that are available today under EU funds, recovery plans, public money, there is an opportunity really to do something very, very meaningful to contribute to the fight against climate change. I would like to remind you that very recently surveys have been carried out by not only by NGOs but also by by think tanks and other important stakeholders have shown that climate change is a greater worry than COVID for young Europeans. So, okay, we have a very, very heavy health emergency, that is the COVID. But for COVID, we might, as we have already done, be able to find a vaccine. For climate, there is no vaccine that will save us. It's only our action that will make a difference. And we need to be aware of this, and we need to remind our policymakers of this. So we need to increase the ambition of the Fit for 55 package, because as I have said before, we're not there yet. We can do more. We can do more to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. We can do more to promote renewable energy. We can do more to save energy. The energy we don't need is the energy we do not have to produce. So there is a lot of potential there. And you as citizens, you have an opportunity to make yourself heard. This is until the end of the year. The European Council will be under the Slovenian presidency. So it's important that you send messages to your government to really take the lead and to really try to negotiate a package that will be ambitious enough for being really meaningful in terms of Europe's contribution to the fight against climate change. What we need to do first and foremost is to stop using and subsidizing fossil fuels to get to 100% renewable energy as soon as possible. We say that this is possible by 2040. There is money there, a lot of money. Let's spend it in order to do this, in order to decarbonize our energy system and become 100% renewable as soon as possible. And you have probably seen that there is a lot of talk in Europe right now about high energy prices. Well, high energy prices are exactly a direct consequence of the fact that we are heavily dependent on fossil fuels, especially on gas. We import almost 80% of the gas we use in Europe. And until we get away of this dependence on fossil fuels, we will have to pay not only the economic costs, because we are exposed to price volatility, geopolitics, and speculation as large importers of fossil fuels. Not only we will have to pay the economic price of this, but also the environmental costs. And the environmental costs are even more important, because there will be no economy in a planet where there are no longer the living conditions to be compatible with human life. So we need to do more, not less, climate action in order to fight against climate change, but also to reap the economic benefits of a renewable energy system, which will stop our dependence on fossil fuels imported from elsewhere. So I would like to close here, and you see that I've also put a couple of links to our assessment of the Fit for 55 package and our us. And this will be our lighthouse over the next 2 years for our advocacy towards the European institutions which are negotiating this legislative package.